Hey y'all, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Taya and this is Taya's Turning Pages. So I feel like I've been MIA for a little bit on my channel, even though I said I was going to post more in December, and that's because work has been super crazy these past couple of weeks, but I should be back on track now. Once I get this video up, it should hopefully be smooth sailing from here on out, but I don't know, we'll see. But I'm happy to be back, and today we will be going over all of the books that I read for November. This was not only a mixed bag of books, but also a mixed bag of just star ratings. Overall, I feel like the vibe of the reading month wasn't bad, it wasn't good, it was just meh. I do have 5-star rated reads in this wrap up, but it was, like I said, just more so just meh. Anyways, I do have quite a few books to get through, so I am going to try to make this as speedy as possible and just jump right in. So with all of that out of the way, let's get started. The lowest book that I have here is sitting at a 3-star, and it is We Had to Remove This Post by Hannah Berkowitz. So I actually saw this book being featured in one of Haley Hughes's book haul videos, and when I heard her talk about the plot and the premise of the story, it sounded really interesting and I decided to pick it up. And so this story follows a young woman named Kaylee who is really down on her luck and she's strapped for cash, and so she decides to apply for a job as a content moderator. And for those of you who do not know, a content moderator is someone who moderates content on the internet. So anytime there is a post or a video that has intense violence or gore, abuse, bigotry, things along those lines, content moderators will take a look at those videos and those posts, flag them, report them, and then they hopefully get taken down. Now there's obviously stipulations and regulations and certain nuances that go into all of that, but that's essentially the gist of the role. And so Kaylee ends up getting a job as a content moderator. You really get to see how working as a content moderator really affects someone's mental health and psyche, and the story takes off from there. All in all, the plot and the premise still interest me when I think back on it, but I just feel like this book wasn't as groundbreaking or revolutionary as it was made out to be. Now, I'm not really sure if that was the author's doing or if that was the reader's doing. I'm not 100% sure. I've seen this book pop up on my Bookstagram as well as Booktube for quite a bit. Everyone that I've seen who has read it and talked about it gave it glowing reviews, and they're like, oh my goodness, this book was so good, it was amazing, da 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 da. But when I read it, when I finished it, I kind of sat back and I was like, that's it? So I just felt like this book, like I said, wasn't as revolutionary or groundbreaking as it was meant out to be. Now, I did enjoy the commentary, of course, but what really got me is the psychological aspect of this book. You guys have heard me say before in other videos that I love a good psychological thriller, mystery, suspense novel, whatever the case is. I love reading books that play tricks on your mind, and that's exactly what this book does for the characters more so. So you really get to see how them being content moderators affects them in their day-to-day lives. And it makes sense, you know, because if you're constantly looking at horrific and terrifying content for 8 hours a day and just going through it and flagging and reporting, then I can only imagine what that does to your mental health. And so I really did enjoy all of those parts of the book, and it was really wild to see Kaylee's coworkers slowly become indoctrinated in certain dark corners of the internet. So like I said, they're flagging really intense and violent content, and they're also looking at conspiracy theories and things along those lines. So there are some characters in here who start to believe things that they never believed before, but because they're exposed to this type of content day in and day out, they slowly become indoctrinated. But I just felt like this was truly a straight shot of a plot. People work effed up jobs and then they themselves become effed up in the process. But it is really short. It's only about 134 pages. So I was able to finish this in one day, and it helped me reach some of my reading goals. So I am happy about that. Next book that I have here that's sitting at a 3.5-star rating is Brutal Prince by Sophie Lark. So this book somehow snuck its way into my reading plans. I wasn't even thinking about this book, nor was I checking for it, but I was watching one of Princess of Paperback's videos, and she was talking about Sophie Lark and the different books and series that you should start out with first if you do want to get into her books. And I do want to try to get into mafia romances more. I know I said in a few videos back that I'm really not into dark romance because of how problematic and intense the subject matter is, but I did also mention that I used to read mafia romances when I was growing up, and so I kind of want to try to get back into mafia romances and just see which ones I like and which ones I don't, because I do feel like there is something in the dark romance community that I might end up liking or at least gravitate towards, but right now I'm only really comfortable with mafia romances. Once I watched Princess of Paperback's video on Sophie Lark, she did mention that Brutal Prince is the first book that pretty much started it all, and so I went on Kindle, downloaded it, and I read it really quickly. I would say I finished it in about like 2 days because it was just really entertaining. So this story follows two mafia families. One one of them is Irish and then the other one is Italian. So they do not get along at all. They're always beefing. Both families are trying to get control over Chicago. In this story, you more specifically follow the children of the mafia families. So you follow the oldest son in the Irish mafia family, Caleb, and he is next in line to take over the family business. And you also follow his love interest named Ada, and Ada is the youngest and I think the only girl in her family. So one day there's an incident that takes place between Ada and her brothers and Caleb, and it's not good. It's not good at all for either parties. Both Caleb's father and Ada's father decide to have a meeting, and they both decide that Caleb and Ada will marry, so that way both families can have an alliance. They both can expand their power over Chicago. And so much to Ada and Caleb's dismay, they're not happy about this. They do not want to get married, but of course they have no choice. And you pretty much just follow them throughout this story of them trying to navigate being in a marriage and also trying to not kill each other in the process. And the story takes off from there. So I know that wasn't the best synopsis, but I don't want to give too much away just because I feel like you should just pick up the book and read it if you're interested. Now, before I jump into my rating and why I rated it a little bit lower, I wanted to talk about the things that I did like. Now, the main thing that I enjoyed about this story is the fact that this is a true enemies to lovers, okay? Caleb and Ada hate each other, and I'm talking about they hate each other down. There were so many instances where these two actually tried to kill each other, and the ways in which they tried to kill each other were very creative. I will give them that, but it was just so fascinating and so funny to read a true enemies to lovers story, because a lot of these enemies to lovers in contemporary romances, of course, are not super high stakes. It's usually a misunderstanding between the characters or a miscommunication, but this one, baby, no, they were not with it, okay? They were really trying to take the other one out. I really like the fact that Sophie Lark really went there and really leaned into the enemies to lovers trope to the max. Another thing that I liked, of course, is the mafia part of it. It really was interesting to just read about Caleb and Ada's families and really learning about how they were able to take control of Chicago and just be able to do the things that they do. I don't know why I've always found like mafia and mob history very interesting, but I have. And then the last thing that I will say that I really enjoyed is Ada's character in particular. I really liked how hot-headed and determined and strong-willed she was. I liked the fact that even though she was unfortunately forced into this marriage with Callum, she wasn't going to let him bully her or tell her what to do, really, and she was still going to stand on her own 2 feet and have her own mind and let him and his family know, just because I'm married to your son doesn't mean that y'all are going to treat me any old type of way or that I'm going to just be a trophy wife. Like, that's not how I was raised, and that's not how I'm going to live my life. And so I had to stand. Like, I had no choice but to stand. And so I really liked her character, and I really liked the fact that she was always challenging Callum and never backing down from a fight or argument or anything like that. The reason why I didn't rate this a bit higher than what I wanted to is simply because I just wish we could have more of a slow burn romance between Callum and Ada. I'm sorry. I just felt like the enemies part of their enemies to lovers journey was so good and so charged. I just really felt like Sophie Lark could have dragged that out a bit more and really made it more worthwhile when they did finally realize that they were in love with one another. But I just felt like we only got a little bit of them hating each other, and then immediately they were attracted to one another and then just started like going at it in that way. And I understand that some stories are going to be more insta-lovey than others, but I just felt like this one in particular could have really benefited from more of a drawn out slow burn romance, in my opinion. I'm not saying that the book needed to be a Mariana Zapata book and be 500 to 600 pages long, but I do think that the story could have been dragged out a little bit more. We would have had more time with Callum and Ada as true enemies, you know, especially because they went from trying to literally murder each other to now being in a happy, loving, lustful relationship. I don't know. That was really my main critique of the book. I just wish it could have been longer, and I wish we could have really spent more time with Callum and Ada as enemies and really like just building up to that slow burn romance. Overall, I really did enjoy the story, and I definitely recommend if you're interested in mafia romances. I will be continuing the series. I forget what the next book is called, but that one is going to be a lot more intense because something happens to a specific character, and I'm just not sure how I'm going to be able to get through this book and stomach it, because there's just certain subgenres within the dark romance genre that I just cannot get on board with. But I'm gonna give it a try. I'm gonna try to have an open mind and give it a try, but I really don't know when I'm gonna get around to that book. But I at least enjoyed Brutal Prince. And the last book that I have here in the 3 to 3.5 star category is Dating Dr. Dill by Nisha Sharma. I'm actually just going to read the synopsis for this book because there's so many moving parts and I don't want to spoil anything. So in the back here it says, Karina Mann dreams of having a love story like her parents, but she prefers restoring her classic car to swiping right on dating apps. When her father announces he's selling her late mother's home, Karina makes a deal with him. He'll gift her the house if she can get engaged in 4 months. But her search for a soulmate becomes impossible when her argument with Dr. Prem Verma, host of the Dr. Dill show, goes viral. Now the only man in her life is the one she doesn't want. Dr. Prem Verma is dedicated to building a local community health center, but he needs to get donors with deep pockets. The Dr. Dill show was doing just that until his argument with Karina went viral, and he was left shortchanged. That's when Karina's meddling aunties present Prem with a solution. Convince Karina he's her soulmate and he'll regain funding for his clinic. Even though his views on love matches and arranged marriages conflict with hers, Prem finds the more he's with Karina, the more he begins to believe she's the woman he wants to spend the rest of his life with. But for Prem and Karina to find their happily ever after, they must admit that hate has turned into fate. So yes, that is the synopsis of this book. I rated it at 3.5 to 5 stars, and I really did enjoy it. There are some critiques that I do have, but I want to start out with the things that I liked. This book is really funny and smutty, and that's exactly what I was looking for when I picked up this book. Before I picked up this book, I read so many thrillers and horror books. I just wanted a cute, lighthearted, smutty, funny romance, and that's exactly what I got with Dating Dr. Dill. So if you were in the market for a book like that, then I definitely recommend picking up this book because I had a ball reading this. And so I really did enjoy the vibes and the feels and the emotions that I got when reading this book. Another thing that I really enjoyed was reading about Karina's character. She's very strong-willed, very determined, and very ambitious, and I just really liked her character. And I really love the fact that she was a hopeless romantic. She wanted the sparks, she wanted the romance, she wanted the passion and the fireworks, and I just loved that representation because I felt seen, okay? I love the fact that she was embracing who she was as a hopeless romantic, and she didn't really care how people felt about it. And I feel like as hopeless romantics, we do get a lot of shit for being that way because of how unrealistic, you know, a lot of these expectations that you might have as a hopeless romantic. And I get that and I understand it, but it makes life more fun. I don't know, like, it just makes life more fun. There's already so many bad things going on in the world right now, so when you are watching a rom-com or reading one, it's just fun to have that type of escapism and just seeing people fall in love, you know? And so I understand where Karina is coming from, and I get it. Now moving on to the things that I did not care for. The main thing that I really did not like about this story was Prem. I'm sorry, you guys. I did not care for Prem as a love interest. I really tried to give him the benefit of the doubt throughout the entire story, but I just felt like Karina could have did better. So because Prem doesn't have the same views on love as Karina, i.e. he doesn't really care about the whole sparks and romance and passion and things like that, that's not really what he cares about. He really looks at love as like a nuisance and a detriment to your health, because if you get a broken heart, then that can cause issues for you later on down the road, things like that. He's not really into the whole idea of romance. He's very like sterile and very like rigid when it comes to it, and that clashes a lot with Karina's personality and her viewpoint. And I just felt like Karina had to do a lot of twisting and contorting and manipulating in order to fit Prem's ideal of a woman that he should pursue. And so I just didn't really care for that, to be honest. Like, even though I love the chemistry and the tension between these two, I just don't necessarily think that they were the right people for one another. But that's neither here nor there. This is just my opinion, but I just did not really buy into their actual like relationship, nor did I buy into Prem as a character. I just felt like he was very arrogant, very smug, and I didn't like the way that he would talk to Karina about her hopeless romantic ideals. There were certain points where I felt like he looked at her as if she was just kind of silly and goofy because she loved the idea of love, and I just didn't like that. I just feel like if you're going to be someone's spouse, the least you could do is respect certain things that they're into and that they like, you know? That's all I'm saying, just basic respect. And I just felt like there were way too many times where Prem disrespected Karina in that regard. And like I said, Karina was willing to bend over backwards for this man, and I just felt like he wasn't willing to do the same, at least not until the very end of the book. Another thing that I did not like was the ending. I felt like this ended way too abruptly and way too suddenly, and I felt like there was supposed to be more than what we got. Now this is going to be turned into a companion series, so there is going to be another book that I think comes out in 2023 that follows Karina and Prem's mutual friends, but I just don't feel like we got a good wrap-up of Karina and Prem at the end of the book, and I didn't understand why. I still recommend picking this up if you are in the market for a lighthearted, smutty, tension-filled romance that has a lot of hijinks and antics. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to the 4-star rated books of the month, and the first book that I like to talk about is From Hollywood with Love, The Rise and Fall and Rise Again of the Romantic Comedy by Scott Meslow. So I actually listened to this book as an audiobook through Audible, and I definitely recommend going that route because this book has a lot of film history wrapped up into it. So I feel like in order to really like digest and retain the information, it's best to listen to this through Audible. But this book is essentially about the romantic comedy genre and how it took Hollywood by storm in the 80s and the 90s, and how it unfortunately had a decline in the early to mid 2000s, and how now slowly starting to regain its traction. And so I did enjoy this book, and I learned so much about the romantic comedy genre, as well as just the different movies that really catapulted the genre into the spotlight. It was really nice to learn more about the romantic comedies that I have watched and that I really enjoyed, and learning how how they even came to be, how the actors were selected for the roles, etc, etc. This was a great educational and informational book on the genre as a whole and Hollywood as a whole, and how Hollywood and the public's perception towards romantic comedies are very polarizing. So I really don't have any like critiques or anything like that. I will preface and say that you probably should have some understanding or some knowledge of romantic comedy movies, because Scott Meslow goes into extensive detail about movies like When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, actors and actresses and their role in these genres. So Sandra Bullock, Jennifer Lopez, Drew Barrymore, even Adam Sandler. So I really liked reading about all of those different aspects of the book and really being able to see like, wow, yeah, this definitely changed the genre, or this actor helped reshape the genre, etc, etc. Now moving on to the next book that I have here, and it is The Taming of Jessie Rose by Beverly Jenkins. So I mentioned in my December TBR video that I totally forgot to talk about this book when I read it back in September. We're here now, and I wanted to give you my thoughts on this book. So this is another Beverly Jenkins book that I have recently crossed off on my TBR list, and I'm really happy that I did. This story follows a woman named Jessie Rose, but I'm just going to call her Jessie. And Jessie actually lives on this farm with her father and her nephew. Unfortunately, Jessie's father is murdered. Jessie not only has to look after this farm and take care of this farm, but she also has to take care of her nephew. And so Jessie's just trying to make it day by day and just trying not to break down so she can remain strong for her nephew. And Jessie really doesn't have any help from anybody because the townsfolk don't like Jessie. Jessie doesn't get along with them, and they don't get along with her. So she's offered really no assistance or help from anyone. Because of this, men that live around Jessie's farm notice that she doesn't have any type of protection or anybody helping her, and so they're trying to take advantage of her and her farm and trying to acquire her land. Jessie's nephew ends up writing this letter to the state marshal, essentially pleading for him to send some backup or some help, because him and his aunt are really going through this alone. And so this marshal ends up sending someone to help Jessie out, and this is where Jessie's love interest, Griffin, comes in. And so Griffin is rough around the edges. He is an outlaw, and him and Jessie don't really get along at first, but as time goes on, you start to witness these two slowly getting to know one another and falling in love along the way. And so I rated this a 4 out of 5 stars, like I mentioned, and I did enjoy this one. I thought it was really sweet, really cute. I loved watching Griffin and Jessie falling in love. There were so many moments where they would like watch the sunset together, or they would just like sneak little glances at one another, brush their hand up against the other, and it was just so cute. Like, it made me feel like a giddy schoolgirl reading about their blossoming romance, especially knowing how the two characters are really adamant on not wanting to fall in love, because Jessie is very independent and very to herself, and Griffin, on the other hand, like I said, is an outlaw. So he's already an outcast in society's eyes, and he doesn't play by the rules. And because he lives a life on the run, he never really thought of himself being a married man or really getting involved with a woman in that way until he met Jessie. So just seeing these two slowly starting to get out of their shell, really trying to put in an effort to get to know the other and to really open their hearts to one another, it was just so sweet, and I loved it, and I swooned every single time I read about these two having one of those romantic moments. The reason why this wasn't a 5-star Beverly Jenkins read for me was simply because I just didn't feel as connected to their characters as I do with her other stories. I am a heavy character driven reader. I'm sorry, but that's how I approach my books. I couldn't really care less about the plot. I know that's really controversial, but I really care about the characters, and I want to get invested in them, because if I don't care about what they have going on or what they're about, I'm not going to want to read the story, not even for the plot, because it's like, why would I care if I don't care about the characters, you know? So that's what I look for when I'm reading books, but especially Beverly Jenkins books, because she does a great job with fleshing out characters and making them two-dimensional. But I just didn't really feel as connected to these two as I do the others. Not every single book is going to be for me, and that's okay. Sorry if the lighting and the camera angle changed, y'all. I had to change my battery because it was dying because I talked too much. But the second to last book that I have here in this 4-star category is It's Not TV, The Spectacular Rise, Revolution, and Future of HBO by Felix Gillette and John Copeland. So I'm going to try to hold it like this because, as you can see, my ring light is glaring from it very badly. So I'm going to try to hold it like this, but it's really funny because I mentioned this book in my November TBR video and how I wanted to read this book for Nonfiction November. Not sure who from Penguin came across my video, but someone did, and they ended up sending this book to me, which I really appreciate and I'm so grateful for. So whoever that was, thank you. And shout out to Penguin Random House for sending this book my way. Now, I did listen to this book via Audible because that's how I prefer to read my nonfiction books nowadays. So I did listen to the audiobook, but I feel like the audiobook also did a great job at really capturing the different nuances and complexities that is this tale of HBO. There are so many things that I could say about this book because I learned so much, you guys. It was so fascinating to read about the psychology behind HBO and how they were able to connect with so many different audiences in such a short amount of time. So going back a little bit, this book is an account of HBO and their company culture, as well as how they came to be and what they are today. And so I think Felix Gillette and John Copeland are actually like media reporters, and you can definitely tell through this story because they did such a phenomenal job with like the reporting aspect of everything that went down at HBO headquarters back in the day, and also just like I said, their company history and earnings and things like that. One thing that I wanted to start out with and say is that I liked the fact that I was able to pick out the similarities between HBO of yesteryear and today. So there were a lot of parallels from their business model from back then, so like in the 80s and the 90s and the early to mid 2000s to today. So I just felt like they had a lot of full circle moments, which is really cool to see. Another thing that I really enjoyed was the trip down memory lane. There were a few chapters that talked about HBO's most notable shows, such as Sex and the City, The Sopranos, The Wire, Game of Thrones, etc., etc. And I just really liked learning more about the history of those shows and how they even came to be, how the actors were selected, and why they decided to take the show in the direction that they decided to take it in. And so like I said, I really enjoy that aspect because I told you guys before that I love history and I love cultural history, and that's exactly what this book is. And there were just so many other little tidbits of cultural history sprinkled throughout here that I was eating up. So besides all of that, the main thing that I found really interesting is that HBO's company culture back then, like I said, in the 80s and the 90s, was just as misogynistic, raunchy, violent, scandalous, debaucherous as most of the content that they made back then and still make today. It really does reiterate that life imitates art. I really like digging deeper and learning more about that because it's really wild how a lot of their shows mimic the company culture. But it's really unfortunate that so many employees went through so many hardships at the hands of some of the executives at HBO during this time period, because it really was a boys club. There were so many different female employees who came forward and spoke about their time at HBO and how they went through hell. There were so many different cases of sexual harassment, assault, domestic violence. There was so much wrapped up into this account that my head was spinning. And so I do appreciate John Copeland and Felix Gillette's intense reporting on this because I didn't know any of this, and it kind of makes me a little bit embarrassed and a little bit shameful because I did mention in my November TBR video that I have always respected HBO as like a visionary and as a, you know, creative genius of sorts, and I still agree with that statement and I still think that's true, but I definitely should have like watched myself in terms of like praising the company, because now knowing the history, it just wasn't it. I am really happy that we as a society are now having more conversations about Me Too and also just toxic work environments and mental health and all of that type of stuff. So I am happy that we have progressed a little bit in that regard, but it's just really unfortunate that these women who went through these experiences during their time at HBO weren't heard or weren't seen or weren't validated. Those are all of my thoughts on this book. I definitely recommend checking out my Bookstagram review on this because I just feel like I have a better way of being a bit more cohesive and streamlined with my thoughts when I'm writing them out versus trying to voice them. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you were interested. I really did enjoy this book. I definitely recommend if you are interested in cultural history and if you are a media fanatic. I did major in public relations when I was in college, and so all of this is very interesting to me personally because this is what I went to school for essentially. So I had a great time reading this. I'm definitely keeping this in my library because this is one of those books where if you are a media fanatic, you just have to have and or read. Okay, y'all, so this is the last 4-star book that I have here, and it is The Family Game by Catherine Steadman. So this was a book of the month pick for November, and I'm really proud of myself for reading it during the month of November because usually I let my book of the month books fall behind, but not with this one because I saw so many people on Bookstagram reading this book and giving it glowing reviews. So I knew that I needed to jump on the bandwagon and read it and see what this book was all about, and I'm so happy that I did because it was phenomenal. I'm just going to read the synopsis for this book because there is a lot going on. Right here in the flap it says the rules. Number 1, listen carefully. Number 2, do your research. Number 3, trust no one. And number 4, run for your life. Harriet Reed, a novelist on the brink of literary stardom, is newly engaged to Edward Holbeck, the heir of a powerful family. And though Edward has long tried to sever ties with them, news of the couple's imminent marital bliss has the Holbecks inching back into their lives. As Harriet is drawn into their lavish world, the family seems perfectly welcoming. So when Edward's father, Robert, hands Harriet a tape of a book he's been working on, she's eager to listen. But as she presses play, it's clear that this isn't just a novel, it's a confession. A confession to a grisly crime, a murder, and suddenly the game is in motion. Feeling isolated and confused, Harriet must work out if this is a part of a plan to test her loyalty, or something far darker. What is it that Robert sees in her? Why give her the power to destroy everything? This might be a game to the Holbeck family, but for Harriet, losing might prove deadly. So So as you can hear by that synopsis, this book is fucking crazy, okay? There is a game at the core of the story, so this is very reminiscent from what I've heard to Knives Out, but I feel like this book has the same vibe as Good Rich People. So if you read Good Rich People and you enjoyed it, then I definitely think you will like this book because, like I said, it has the same vibe. But I don't want to give too much away because this is fairly short and it is a thriller, but I will say a few things. The first thing that I will say is that I loved how unique and refreshing this plot was. Even though it has similar vibes to Good Rich People, it still stands on its own. It shows you how absurd and bored the 1% must be. Stories like these make you think and make you wonder if 1%ers are really like this. Like, do they really sit up here and play these type of games with people that are not as wealthy as them? I wouldn't be surprised, but there are a lot of books I feel like that are like this, where it just paints a picture of how the ultra elite and wealthy are just sick, twisted, demented individuals who will stop at nothing to humiliate people that don't make as much money as them for their own entertainment and to cure their own boredom. I don't know, there's clearly something there, and we definitely need to look into this more because I just want to know where these authors are like getting these ideas from. So whenever there is a thriller that has this type of plot or has these elements, I'm going to pick it up and give it a read. This is the perfect book to read during this time of the year because this story is actually set, I think, from maybe September/October to December and like the Christmas time. And the last thing that I will say is that I really liked Harriet's character. She held her own and she did such a great job at trying to play the game the way that the Holbecks intended for her to play the game, you know? So like I said, I don't want to give too much away. I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say that Harriet isn't a punk and don't underestimate her. I thought that she was a great sparring partner for them. We're finally moving on to the 5 stars of the month. Thank goodness, because I feel like I've been talking for so long. But the first book that I have here in this 5-star pile is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So I'm not going to go into really any detail about this book. If you know, you know. I've talked about this book extensively on my channel, so definitely make sure you go check out my older videos if you're interested in learning more about the plot and the premise and my overall thoughts on this book. I decided to reread this year, and I'm so happy that I did because I was able to go back and annotate the hell out of this book. As you can hopefully see here, I really went to town because I read The Picture of Dorian Gray last year for the first time, and I really enjoyed the story. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars then, and I decided to revisit it this year so that way I can go back and annotate all of my favorite parts and also just pick up on certain things that I didn't pick up on the first time around. All right, y'all, and the last book that I have here in this wrap up that is also sitting at a 5 star, it's my favorite book that I read during the month of November, and it is Love Radio by Ebony Liddell. So this story follows 2 high school seniors who both live in Detroit, and so one character's name is Prince, the other character's name is Danny. Starting with Prince, Prince is a very nice and sweet, happy-go-lucky guy. He is a radio show host, and he is actually the youngest radio show host at this station. His segment is all about love, so he dishes out relationship advice as well as dating advice. I know, very unrealistic, but it is a cute concept either way. And on the flip side of that, you have Danny, who is his love interest, and Danny is very to herself, very studious, and very determined to get accepted into NYU so that way she can move to New York City and hopefully become a famous writer one day. And so Prince has actually had a crush on Danny for as long as he could remember, but he never had the courage to actually go up to her and start a conversation with her because, like I said, Danny is very to herself and she is a little bit standoffish, but her and Prince end up crossing paths one day and they don't get off on the right foot at all, but eventually they end up reconciling. Prince is pretty straightforward and honest with his feelings about Danny. To Danny, he pretty much lets her know that like he is interested in her, he's had a crush on her for a long time. Because Danny is so focused and so goal-oriented, she's not really interested in entertaining anything with Prince, but Prince proposes a bet and says to her, I bet you I can make you fall in love with me after 3 dates. And so Danny is skeptical, but she decides to take him up on this bet, and the story takes off from there. I'm actually obsessed with this book. You guys have no idea. I couldn't stop thinking about this book after I finished it. I loved how wholesome and sweet and just overall a breath of fresh air that this book was. Ebony Liddell mentioned in her acknowledgements as well as like throughout the book that she really wanted to create a story that focused on 2 Black characters who are in love, and that's it. Nothing else, no traumatic stuff happening, just 2 Black kids falling in love. Now there are some heavy-hitting topics that are incorporated throughout the book. Definitely make sure you look up trigger warnings, but this story at its core was a romance novel and I loved it so much. It was so refreshing to see these 2 Black kids just falling in love and just having a great time while doing it. I felt so seen and so represented reading this book. I don't want to get into all my business out there on the internet, but a character in the story has a chronic illness. Just reading about how another character has to take care of them and is always constantly worrying about them. I see you, I hear you, we are here, we see each other, you know? I really love that representation throughout the book, and like I said, it just made me feel seen. I think that this is the best YA romance that I've read all year. truly, that I have read all year. And I don't really read that many YA romances to begin with, but regardless, this is still the best one that I read this year, and I definitely recommend this to everybody. I don't care who you are, pick up this book because it is just so wholesome, so sweet. I also really love the fact that Emily Liddell threw in famous black romance movies. So there were talks about Love and Basketball, there were talks about Love Jones, Brown Sugar, all of those classic black romance movies. And as someone who has watched all of them and still rewatches them to this day, I was able to relate and identify with a lot of the commentary that was in this book that focused on those movies. All right, y'all, and those are all of the books that I have read for the month of November. As you can see, I had a busy reading month and I read a lot of books, at least for me, and this video was not easy to film. So I'm really hoping that this turns out well when I go back into iMovie and edit it, because I had a time trying to film this. I'm out of breath, I'm tired, I need some coffee. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me my channel out. And lastly, please make sure you follow me on Bookstagram as well as Storygraph. I will leave all of that information linked down below, as well as at the end of the video like I always do. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!